Hello everybody, I'm Elwirfy, and today we're going to be watching this video by Kneecap Jake. I wanted to talk about it because I think it's an interesting kind of thought exercise, this idea about what do you say when someone asks how you're doing. I thought that was a really interesting point of topic, so I'll let him go ahead and introduce what he's thinking, and then I'll kind of explain my thought process at least behind it, which hopefully makes sense to all of you.
Walks up to you in the corridor and they ask, "How's it going?" And you instinctively say, "Yeah, it's okay." But you know deep down that you aren't okay. But now
Right. I mean, I think everyone's gone through this. If a coworker walks up to you and they're like, "How are you doing?" You always just say you're okay because, you don't want to make things bad for them, right? You don't want to make them feel bad. You want to have a sense of mutual, like, understanding emotionally that you're on the same page. That way they don't feel like they need to behave a certain way around you. Very common feeling, in my opinion.
now isn't the time. You're not going to talk about how you truly feel right now.
Right.
This is the question that you always answer with a lie. You always mask the truth because there's never a good time to go into how you truly feel, especially in the workplace.
I mean, it depends on your relationship with the people in your workplace. I would argue that depending on how good of a standing you have with a coworker, you might be at a point where you're able to share things. I know that when I was working in the food service industry, there'd be times where after work we'd all go to someone's house and just hang out as friends, and we would just be people together. And so then it became, you build a relationship where you then feel comfortable enough to express maybe deeper feelings that you wouldn't normally be sharing with like a regular plain of the mill coworker. And admittedly, maybe this video is just talking about coworkers who you don't have a good interpersonal relationship with, because obviously if it's someone who like feels like a stranger, obviously you're not going to share your life with them, right? That makes sense because you don't, again, it's that feeling of guilt that like you don't want to burden someone else with your problems.
And I just want to talk about this a little bit today and how masking how you truly feel can be incredibly fatiguing. For
Correct.
instance, just yesterday I was applying for a new job and I had a test job to see if I could truly do the job, and I found it incredibly stressful. And by the time that I went to my current day job, I felt incredibly stressed, and I didn't really realise it at the time, but it was making me feel a bit disassociated from my own body.
Yeah, so like that's pretty common if you're starting a new job that you might feel like maybe you're not doing a good job, or if you're doing badly because it's your first time, that would certainly raise some emotional concerns that maybe you feel like you're not good enough for the job, or you feel like you're being judged. I mean, I think that's very natural and normal. So it makes sense that like throughout a day of work when you're trying it out, you would absolutely be stressed about, your performance and the way that reflects on yourself and your character.
The way I was describing it was that my soul had sort of been pulled out from my body and I was controlling someone else's body. And I felt like my motor functions were clunky. When I walked in through the front.
Yeah. So again, this is just reiterating the fact that he felt like he was doing a bad job, and he felt upset that his body couldn't do it. I've certainly had times in working in jobs, like when I worked at a mail business, for example, where you like sort mail and stuff. I had a lot of trouble figuring out their computer system initially, and there was still that pressure of working quickly. So I found myself accidentally pressing the wrong buttons, and I felt bad that hadn't yet trained my hands to move correctly in order to process mail efficiently. For example.
Door, I felt like everyone was staring at me. I had a big sense of paranoia. I knew deep down that no, not everyone was looking at me, but I felt like an alien in a human body.
Yeah, especially when you're going to a new job and you're around these people who don't know you. Think about like when you're at school and you'd want to make friends with a new group of friends, like everyone in that already established friend group will all see you as an outsider. And so letting you into that, you'll feel as the outsider that there's a lot of judgment coming towards you, and it's the same way in the workplace, right? So the work culture, whatever job you're applying for, they've already established kind of a social decorum between each other. So when you're entering that space, it'll fundamentally change the social dynamics of that workplace relationships that they've all built with each other, because now there's this new unknown element and they don't know how their personalities will interact, how your personality will cause their personalities to change the way that they have their relationships with each other. It's all interconnected and very interwoven. So that's why there's this feeling that when you're coming into a new place, you'll feel like an outsider just naturally because you, when you literally are, but also just on that emotional level, you're also not at the same page as everyone else you're going to be working with.
And when I took note of how I was actually feeling, I sat down in the office before my shift for 10 minutes and I tried to just calm myself with breathing because I'd identified that I was just feeling stressed.
And that's good. I mean, there might be times when you need a moment to kind of compose yourself to make sure that you're able to act professionally, because you certainly don't want to do anything that'll add to your feeling of embarrassment or concern while you're in a work environment.
And this breathing didn't really work, and I had to just start my shift whilst feeling like an alien. And as I walked past co-workers, they would say, "Hey, how's it going?" And I would answer with the lie, "Everything's fine." All whilst I felt like a malfunctioning robot that couldn't control my own hands properly. And
Yeah, and sometimes you're lying so that, like, well, you could lie for a number of reasons, but the main one is because of that social pressure, right? To want, because you're also trying to impress them, right? So your coworker will be like, "Hey, how are you doing?" You're like, "Yeah, I'm good. I got it. You know, everything's cool." That way, you make sure that your coworker isn't worried about you, so that way they're not stressed, because you're feeling the sense of guilt that you don't want to put burden onto someone else, which is a noble reason, but ultimately it's not the most healthy thing because it's putting up a barrier of communication artificially. Even if the other person doesn't feel like it's a barrier, it is a barrier because you know internally that you're not communicating the truth.
And so I battled with this feeling for about an hour until it passed. But it made me think about this topic and it made me want to talk about it. And
Sure.
for the rest of the day, I put on the facade that everything was okay. And every time I was asked that question of how's it going, I would just answer with the age-old lie that
Yeah, I mean, you even see this in like, not even the workplace, but just out in public, dating apps, when you're talking to family, friends. Anytime someone asks how you're doing, you typically say, "I'm okay." That's the general rule that you say. Because if your response is, "Oh, I'm not doing good," then there's obviously the pile of concern and there's the worry and there's just a lot of extra emotional feelings that you as the person responding are trying to avoid inflicting on someone else. But I think the framing of that might be bad because it leads to an unhealthy relationship because it takes away the honesty out of the conversation. So to be honest, I try my best to answer honestly with that because I've thought about this concept before. Of course, it's part of why I'm talking about it. I try and answer as honestly as possible. So I might say, "I'm doing all right now, but earlier I was having some stuff going on," but you know, you frame it correctly, right? You need to give good framing, I think, is important. Like if I'm stressed about school and I'm at home, and someone says, "How are you doing?" I'm like, "Well, I'm okay right now because I'm at home, but when I'm at school, I'm feeling stressed, and that bothers me." So that way, the person asking that won't feel like they're necessarily at fault for causing the stress. Because that's another thing you need to keep in mind, is that when someone asks, "How are you doing?" and if you say, "Oh, I'm terrible," even if it's not their fault, they might feel, because of empathy, they might feel like they have to fix it, which is not necessarily the correct solution.
everything was good. But by the time it got to the end of the day and I got home, I felt completely exhausted. Masking how I truly felt all day and having to put an enthusiastic front on had left me so tired. And
Well, yeah, and it'll drain you too. I mean, if you have to go through your day-to-day routine essentially lying to people, well, not essentially, you're lying to people about how you feel for the sake of keeping the peace, it'll feel like you're isolated. I mean, that isolates you in itself because you're not being honest about at what point in your life that you're at, like how you're feeling. So everyone around you will be treating you as if you're fine when you're not. So then those bad feelings will build up in you because you're not able to express that to the people who, in the perfect world, you would want to have help you.
when my fiance came home from work and she asked how I was doing, I really did not want to answer that question at all. I didn't even want to be asked that by anyone. And I often find at home, I really hate being asked, how's it going?
And it makes sense, especially with he said his fiance, whoever your intimate partner is, you want them to see you in the best light possible. But part of being in a relationship is your ability to communicate when you're not feeling okay or when something's wrong or if like something's disconnected. That's a really important skill to have, and it's hard to master. I even struggle with it myself. I'm not going to sit here and say I always communicate 100%. Sometimes the guilt that you feel that's within you that makes you want to keep the other person happy will be so powerful that you allow yourself to hurt yourself for the sake of keeping the peace, which isn't good. I mean, it sucks. And I'll admit, I hate getting asked this question too, because, I mean, we're all human. We all have stress in our lives. I mean, as I'm recording this, my answer today might be different than tomorrow or yesterday. There's different things going on, but most of the time, just okay is not a good enough answer. And I think nowadays most people would agree that when you say, "Oh, how are you doing?" and they say, "Oh, I'm fine," I think we all pretty much know that's a lie. But due to social etiquette, we don't pry, right? You wouldn't say like, "Oh," like if I said, "Oh, hi, I'm fine," and then someone else asked me like, "Oh, what's been going well in your life?" Then I would have trouble answering that, right? But people don't usually push that far because of, again, those kind of boundaries we've artificially imposed.
Because I know that I'm not doing that well, and I don't really want to talk about it.
Yep.
I'd rather be asked absolutely anything else than how I'm feeling.
Sure.
Because I don't really want to acknowledge how I'm feeling. And so I came to the conclusion.
I thought that was interesting to not want to acknowledge what you're feeling, because I feel like we already acknowledge what we're feeling by intentionally lying, because you know how you're feeling, like regardless of whether you spurt it out into the world. So maybe that's what he means, like he didn't want to let other people know how he was feeling, which is fair. I think that makes sense. But certainly I would slightly argue a bit that you do know how you're feeling. You're just not willing to admit it to yourself in some cases.
Conclusion that I want to talk about it today with you guys and talk about the effects of masking how you really feel. Now, the problem is there's never a good time in a workplace to go into how you truly feel. It's just not the right environment to do it. So
yeah, it's not the right environment to do it in, because when you're at work, you're expected to be thinking about work. And your employer certainly doesn't want their employees to spend their time talking about their feelings when they need to be on task. So I will agree that it is a bit annoying to be answering these kind of big questions in a work environment, but that's again why we have the decorum of keeping everything. Am I using that word right? Of keeping everything civil and peaceful, and not wrestling the bucket or anything. We're keeping things really calm and casual and trying to smooth everything out.
So instinctively, I will answer that question of how are you doing with a lie. Because the worst thing that I could do in the middle of a shift is actually say the truth. Say that I feel terrible. Because then that could cause an awkward conversation. It could detract from the work that we're actually trying to do there. And it's bringing my own feelings into the workplace.
I agree.
I do wish that it was an allocated part of the day where we could all sit down and ask each other, how's it going?
Yeah, and I'll stop him in the middle on that point, because this is why I was telling the story about earlier when I was a dishwasher, right? How there was a time when all of the employees after work, we would go and talk to each other and we'd build those relationships, we'd build those connections. What this person here is experiencing, I think, is the fact that he is in a work environment where outside of work, you don't really have friends. You're just colleagues, and that's where the relationship ends. So that's why you'd feel more isolated at work, because you're not able to build bonds outside of the work environment. And that's why it's important to have people in your life to rely on, to share your feelings with, even if you can't express them at work, because you don't have as good of a bond with your coworkers as you do with someone outside of work.
We could answer with the truth. I think this could go quite a long way, because I don't know about you, but masking how I feel is really fatiguing, but I don't really notice it until I get home and it's the end of the day and I feel completely mentally exhausted. And
yeah, well, everybody's more reflective once they're at home. I mean, let's be honest, right? Like if I'm at work and I'm focused on working, and I just blow off a question, I don't really have time to necessarily process that question until I'm able to be at one and at peace with my own thoughts, where I can be reflective on the day. And 2020's, hindsight's 2020, and you think, oh, I should have said this, oh, I could have done that, but you don't do it, and then you wake up, you go in the next day to work, and it's the same thing. You're still not being honest with your coworkers. You're still not able to give all of yourself to them, and so that's why you have difficult friction at work sometimes, because you can't really express yourself and people get frustrated.
During that mental exhaustion, answering any questions about feelings or anything like that is probably the worst thing that I could be doing, because I'm just not in the right headspace anymore for it. So what solutions can we come up for this problem? I think allocating some time during the day, perhaps at the start of the shift or the end of the shift before work actually begins, for everyone to just share a little bit about how they're feeling could be really valuable.
I think it could be, but we also need to be mindful that there are companies already that have these like team building exercises, and it's just like how, yeah, if you've been to and where, well, I suppose if you're watching, you've probably gone to work, if you made it this far. So like you know how like you'll have these team building exercises where everyone's supposed to go around the room and introduce themselves, or you pass the ball to each other, whatever weird team building exercises you do. Because it's usually in a supervised environment with your higher ups usually supervising, it's tough to be able to share personal things about yourself in a public setting. A lot of people need a more casual environment, and that's why the best bonds I've made with coworkers has been outside of the workplace. And this is something you need to take initiative on. It's not something you can just like expect to always happen, right? Because if everyone silently, they get on their, especially nowadays, you get on your phone and on your phone until you get to your car and then you drive home. There's no opportunity really for social interaction. So it's important to try and catch people like maybe before they get to their phone in a transition period. But certainly, anything supervised, like a pre-planned share your feelings session, will lead to people feeling concerned about what's safe to share because their employer might be involved. And even if the employer is not involved, even if it's just the coworkers, it's like a kind of a therapy session without a leader. You need someone guiding the group. I mean, you could take up that role, certainly, but then you'll be othering yourself from your coworkers. And the whole point is to be in that shared community of coworkers on the same level, which is why, again, I still argue that outside of work time is the best place to go into those feelings if that's something you feel you need to do. If you're not able to satisfy like an outlet to share those feelings with either a regular friend who's not a coworker or a significant other.
But then a lot of people probably still wouldn't want to share their true feelings at their place of work. So I think one really great step is just even acknowledging that this happens, like me making this video right now, just acknowledging that I am masking how I'm feeling.
Yeah, I think that's fine. Obviously, I have no problem with the video. I think it's good to make videos like this where we talk about kind of these complex issues that no one really wants to talk about, but I think we all kind of agree and understand that we're all experiencing this same shared feeling, which is important.
Acknowledging that I'm not sharing my real emotions and feelings, and then taking time in the future to process those feelings, to talk through it. This could be in the form of just making notes of how you feel as those emotions arise, perhaps on the notes app on your phone, or writing them down with pen and paper. Some people then like to actually burn that piece of paper, or then delete the notes because they've now got the emotion out and written down.
Yeah, that sounds like stuff that you would hear in a therapy session. I think that's completely fine. Anything that you can do to make yourself feel more comfortable with your feelings is always going to be something that you should value. Whatever strategy you decide to use, that's up to you. I'll admit I'm someone who just thinks everything and then will spurt stuff out. So I kind of handle it in a weird way, but everyone has their own method of doing things. So just finding something that makes you comfortable, I think, is going to be the easiest route to success.
You could also try just talking about it like I am today through this video. Or you could try talking about it with someone you trust during a set period of time where you've dedicated that time to just talking about it. Or you could carry on just completely masking it and get very stressed and boil over with your emotions.
Yeah, I mean, there's plenty of instances where someone gets set off and you just kind of explode into like this whole river of emotions. And that's not healthy, right? We don't want to do that. We don't want to encourage that. But, at the same time, it is a valid way for people to cope sometimes. And for them, that might be what's best for them, but that isn't necessarily what's best for the social dynamics of the collective group as a whole, who they're expressing those emotions to. So you just need to be really careful about who you're expressing all the built-up feelings if you go that route. I don't think that's a good idea. I think you should try and kind of like a gas, slowly turn the dial and let more and more steam out slowly rather than just cranking the dial and letting all the steam come out at once, and then you have a fire.
The thing is, in the workplace, I don't really foresee any period of time where it is good to answer that question with the truth. And maybe that's the problem. I don't even believe that there's a good time to share. I don't even believe that there's a right time to talk about your real feelings in the workplace. And maybe that's the problem, it's just my mindset. But I have this continuous track record of avoiding that question at all costs when I'm in my home environment. So how do you guys deal with that question? And do you lie to that? Do you always answer with, yeah, everything's all right?
Yep. I mean, that pretty much sums it up, right? Ultimately, work might not be the best place to have those feelings. And for some people, that's okay. For some people, that's not. Some people need constant reassurance throughout the day. Some people need an outlet throughout the day. And some people don't. And the problem is you just really don't know what kind of a person anyone is until you ask them, until you just make an attempt and talk to them and see how it goes. I don't have a one-to-one playbook of exactly how you approach someone about that, but presumably for coworkers and you're spending a lot of time together, perhaps you offer to hang out outside of work, and then if you become closer outside of work, then you're also more likely to be closer during work. And then maybe during those work days, when they say that, maybe you will get to a point where your relationship with them is comfortable enough that you can share feelings that you're having. So it comes down to perspective, and every individual person is unique in their own subjective experience. So you just got to navigate that, and I don't have a perfect playbook for it, but I think everybody, though, at the very least, at the end of the day, can agree that sharing your feelings is important. And I think that holding back and lying to that question of how are you doing is something that becomes habitual and becomes routine and essentially evolves into a meaningless question because you're always going to get the same answer. So at that point, I guess my final question for you is why even ask that question? So anyway, I guess that's the end of the video. Make sure to subscribe if you haven't already. And as always, I'm Elwirfy, and I'll definitely see you guys next time. Take care, everyone.